Yes, we're merging with Moss Adams. They're headquartered in Seattle, and together we'll be the sixth largest advisory firm in the U.S.
That's big news. Welcome back to Shelf Confidence, a podcast brought to you by the Pennsylvania Food Merchants Association. On today's episode, we're diving into the world of strategy, innovation, and transformations with three leaders from Bakertilly, one of the nation's top advisory firms. We're joined by Jeff Vrabel, a principal at Bakertilly's commercial practice with more than 4 decades of experience supporting high growth and entrepreneurial companies. Michael Milani, a principal at Bakertilly Capital, who leads their merger and acquisition efforts, and Dave DuVarney, a principal in the digital solutions practice who helps companies harness the power of data and AI and to drive innovation. We'll talk about the trends shaping the food and beverage industry, how businesses are preparing for future growth, and what role technology, finance, and advisory support play in building a stronger, smarter operation. So let's get into it. How are you all doing today? Thanks for being on the show.
Great. Thank you, John.
Thanks, John. Happy to be here.
Yeah, we've been looking forward to this. So let's dive right in. Jeff, I have a question for you. We're just going to take it right from the top here. So for our listeners who may not be familiar, give us a quick breakdown and overview of Bakertilly and the kinds of work you guys do across industries.
Sure. Well, Bakertilly is a leading advisory, tax, and assurance firm serving clients across the U.S. and internationally. We provide customized business solutions that generate and sustain growth. We have a strong presence here in Pennsylvania and work closely with businesses here to help them grow, innovate, and navigate change. One of our key areas of focus is the food, beverage, and agribusiness sector, and we take a full value chain approach to it. This is also one of the key sectors in Pennsylvania. We support food processors, manufacturers, cooperatives, wholesalers, distributors, supermarkets, and emerging brands. With more than 2,000 food, beverage, and agribusiness clients nationwide, we understand the sector's challenges, from tight margins and complex regulations to the need for digital transformation, workforce efficiency, operational sustainability, and growth through mergers and acquisitions. And you'll hear more about that as we have our conversation here today. Our team helps companies embrace automation, improve financial visibility, and make informed decisions across the organization. As merger and acquisition activity continues to shape this sector, we provide end-to-end support. That includes deal readiness and transaction advisory services up front, through to the post-deal integration and succession planning that follows that. Most recently, Bakertilly completed our own strategic combination with Moss Adams, creating the sixth largest advisory CPA firm in the country. Together, we're expanding the resources, capabilities, and industry expertise available to our clients, and that includes the food, beverage, and agribusiness landscape.
That's awesome. So that's a big piece of news there, the merger, right? Can you tell me a little bit about that real quick?
Yes, we're merging with Moss Adams. They're headquartered in Seattle, and together, combined, will be the sixth largest advisory firm in the U.S.
That's big news.
Yes,
Yeah, we're going to have roughly
excited.
11,000 professionals across 100 offices, coast to coast, serving all the industries that you would expect a big accounting firm to be serving, including food and beverage.
That's impressive. No, that's awesome, guys. Mike, I had a question for you. So what's driving so much of the M&A activity in the food and beverage space right now? Are there any special forces or trends behind this that you could talk to us about?
Yeah, thematically, we're going to talk about 4 trends here today, John. The first of which is companies adding to their product portfolio to primarily to get a differentiated or high growth profile business that they acquire. And I'll talk about a few areas. The first of which is in beverage. Recently, Celsius bought the female-focused energy drink Milani Nutrition for about $1.8 billion. Really interesting stuff going on in the beverage space. That's just one of the many deals that have gotten done. Healthier for You Foods is also booming in M&A. Hershey, which is based in Pennsylvania, recently bought Lesser Evil, which is a better for you food maker of popcorn and other snacks.
Saw that.
So local deal there. You're also seeing strategic buyers augmenting their GDP plus sort of growth with acquisitions in the market. Another example of that is Cal-Maine, which is a very large egg producer. They recently acquired Echo Lake Foods, which makes waffles, pancakes, as well as ready-to-eat products, so adjacencies with regards to that strategic buyer. And lastly, and not least importantly, private equity is continuing to buy very actively in food and beverage. Swander Pace just recently acquired Maple Donuts, also based in Pennsylvania, which is a manufacturer of high quality frozen bakery products, which quite frankly is my favorite deal of the bunch that I just mentioned.
No, that sounds good. No, that's a lot of money for that one there, 1.8 billion.
Yeah, really big acquisition. What you've seen is Celsius, as you know, kind of created this better for you. I just call it seltzer product or water product, whatever you want to call
Sure.
it. And Alani is primarily focused on the female market, and not to sound like energy drinks and all these other things are very men focused, but historically they've been very male focused. And I think what they were ignoring was call it 50% of the market. And Celsius has done very well with women. Alani's going to enable them to do much better in that female market.
Oh, that's awesome. My experience with that is more in the White Claw and Truly variety, which is definitely not
True,
the same
true.
thing at all.
We're talking NA here, John. NA.
Yeah, very different. Just want to pull that a little bit further. You were talking about the private equity component of that. Could you talk to me a little bit more about that? That's a big thing these days in this space. I was hoping maybe you could flesh that thought out a little more for me.
Yeah, so we'll touch on this in a few other comments, but what you've seen over the last, call it 30 plus years, is private equity has developed a thesis and continued to invest in food companies across the US, including and anywhere from the agri side of the equation to beverage equations to food companies, branded, non-branded, contract manufacturing. All of us on the call here today have to eat and drink at least 2 to 3 times a day. It's a business that is largely U.S. focused in terms of the manufacturing production base. Certainly consumption is 100% here. And then what you've also seen is that the returns from some of the early investors in the food and beverage space have been quite compelling. So you can buy a platform company and continue to bolt on and make additional acquisitions into the future. And then as you're looking toward an exit as private equity, those are very easy companies to exit. And the multiples have stayed relatively stable over time with regards to EBITDA at the lower end of the market. And when you exit at the upper end of the market, specifically on the branded side, you're getting some really toppy EBITDA multiples. So it's a very stable investment sector that private equity knows and loves.
No, that makes sense. We hear about it in the news all the time. So kind of pulling that a little bit further. So when a company is thinking about selling, what should they be doing early to prepare? Like even before they talk to the buyer? I imagine there's a whole lot of things, a whole checklist of things they need to do in advance of that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so if you're going to think about selling your business, you should start thinking about it a number of years in advance. And the reason for that is typically if you're thinking about doing a transaction, you have to align the ownership group and the management team about a potential sale in the future. Management team is very important. Ownership alignment with them is vital. Secondly, the financial and operating reporting systems and reports that are generated are vitally important, not only to manage your business every day, but think about your business from a buyer's perspective. They want to know that financial and operating reports are available, that KPIs and dashboards and all the other metrics that they would be looking at are something that you do every day as an operating company. The third is really more of a value driver and value issue, more strategic. The ability to communicate what drives the value of your business and what some of the issues are that the business faces are very important. We call that self-awareness. How self-aware are you of what you actually do every day, and why do you occupy the niche you're in, and why you're successful? There's other things to think about, but then what you really comes down to is M&A is a team sport. So most business owners and most companies that are privately held or family held only do one big transaction. There may be a follow-on transaction with private equity, but in order to do that transaction and manage the process correctly, you need to line up advisors, and that includes accountants, M&A tax people, legal advisors, investment bankers, and ultimately high net worth advisors for the family to manage their money post-transaction. And then, assuming you got your ducks in a row and you get your information gathered and you think you're ready to go talk to an investment banker or investment bankers, trusted advisors, typically, you should sit down with that investment banker and have them explain to you the range of value of your company. And that includes enterprise value and equity value. Enterprise value is, if someone pays $100 million for a business and they have $50 million of debt, that means the equity value fundamentally is $50 million. I'm doing really simple math. And the equity is what you walk away with after tax, and that's what the sellers are going to have to live on after they exit their business. The second part of that equation is understanding the competitive landscape of buyers. So there's private equity buyers, there's strategic buyers, and understanding who could be likely candidates. And then lastly, really understand what a sale process looks like. A lot of people have this mindset that they can get transactions done quickly. That is a little bit of a mirage in today's world. We would argue that a minimum sale process from start to finish is 6 to 12 months, just because of the preparation phase, the marketing phase, and ultimately the due diligence phase. So back to the top, getting all your ducks in a row with regards to that financial and operating information, that comes to be very, very helpful as you move through a process.
No, it makes sense. I have one more question for you, Mike, and I'd love to get your guys' feedback on this question as well. So, like, obviously, we deal with the food and beverage sector, obviously, with the Pennsylvania Food Merchants Association, and I'd love to know what makes a food and beverage business attractive to buyers in this environment. I imagine there's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah, there's a ton. So we would say that, and then we talked about this earlier, it's a very attractive sector in general for buyers. There are a number, so said another way, there are a number of buyers. So assume that demand is endless, right? So the demand curve to buy these companies is very, very solid. It's going to exist and it's not going to vary over time. What has started to change and is constantly evolving is a supply of companies in the market, right? So what makes these businesses attractive and why are they going to be bought ultimately? Well, baby boomer owners and people plus or minus that are now at the exit stage, right? Oh, yeah. So that's very evident. The average baby boomer now is 70 years old. Secondly, the better for you food and beverage companies, which started over the last, call it 10 plus years, many of those are now mature enough to exit. And a lot of those business, saying politely, were built to sell, right? So a lot of these high-flying beverage companies were built to sell, right? They're building the company up and they know that they want to exit. I think another factor is COVID and the financial effects of that are largely in the rearview mirror. And what you've seen is that both earnings, meaning EBITDA, and revenue have stabilized. And the final point is you have not seen a ton of turbulence from, I just call it the recent events around the world. So even though there are some impacts with regards to tariffs on some food and beverage companies, and there's certainly impact on the equipment side for producers, we view that politely as short-term dislocation. So our view is that should be largely in the rearview mirror by the third quarter. And then I think some food and beverage companies which had put processes on hold or had thought about doing something and put that on hold, I think they're going to start to pivot to thinking about what they can do in the future.
I like the sound of that. That sounds good. Did you other gentlemen have any other thoughts on that?
There are companies looking to round out their product portfolio. If they have several different products that they can take to the ultimate supermarket distributor, and then have other ones that they can add to that will get them more shelf space, more opportunities to sell their products. I think that amplify some of what Mike said around that.
So, speaking of Mike, we're going to defer to him to another question here. I got one more for you, Mike. So what are some common risks or red flags that companies should watch for during the M&A process, and how does Bakertilly help manage those?
Yeah, so I'm going to flip this to the buy side. I was talking about the sell side previously. So in order to be a good seller, you need to think like a buyer, which is always something that people get somewhat confused about. But when we pitch for work, we're helping a company think about selling their business, but what we're actually doing is sitting in the buyer's chair, right? We're trying to figure out what drives this company, why are they profitable. Some red flags that we have seen are sales dollars increasing, but sales volumes not increasing. So that is a huge thing that we look for. We've also seen instances where gross profit margins and EBIT margin percentages are lower than public companies in their space. And, the question is why? So what's wrong with the gross profit margin? What's wrong with EBITDA margins? And how can they improve to get back to industry standards? Obviously, some companies perform well above those industry standards, but that's another red flag. The other thing that does scare us often is adjusted EBITDA that has too many add backs and too many pro forma adjustments. So let's say hypothetically you've got EBITDA of $20 million. If 10 of that is add backs, we're going to start scratching our head as to what makes sense about the ongoing free cash flow and the EBITDA of that business. The final thing that does scare us is infrastructure, right? So we go as on the buy side, we go meet with a company and we don't see the infrastructure, right? There's a thin or weak management team. the financial and operating reporting systems are not up to snuff and cannot produce real-time usable data to manage the business on a day-to-day basis. And then underinvested facilities, which happens every now and again in food and beverage. And in many instances, what you've seen is deferred or delayed capital expenditures or automation not put in place, where you've seen that in other facilities where they're really taking advantage of the latest and greatest automation that is in food and beverage. There are some ways that we can help clients on the buy side, by the way, so they can identify these risks and not overpay for a business or walk away from a deal. Sometimes the best deal that you do is the deal you don't do. So that's something we caution clients about. So in fundamental format, the Bakertilly Capital team that I work on can help companies look at enterprise value ranges of targets and can help buyers structure transaction in terms of what's going to be offered and all the other bells and whistles that go with a buy side offer. Secondly, once a letter of intent is agreed, we do have a due diligence team in Bakertilly Transaction Advisory Services that can do buy side quality of earnings, and that's scrubbing those numbers down, and that's where those flags start flying up on sales dollars versus sales volume, margins being out of whack, or there's been too many EBITDA add backs. Also, our strategy team can help buyers do commercial due diligence. How big is the market? What is the market position? Are they a market leader? Are they a market follower? And then they also do voice of customers. So think about a due diligence process. As you get toward the end, most buyers want to interview a handful of customers to verify the strength of the relationship and the value-added partnership that's there. M&A tax, we talked about that previously. Every deal's got M&A tax. That is inevitably going to happen. And then lastly, post-merger, Bakertilly has a CFO advisory services team that can help buyers on the integration side build dashboards, build KPIs, build board reports. So think about it as a whole life cycle from start to finish on the buy side. And obviously you can pick and choose where you want to work with Bakertilly along the continuum, but our goal is to be a one-stop shop for clients that need those sort of buy side services.
That makes sense. Obviously, my contracts over my life have been significantly smaller than Bakertilly's, but yes, being able to walk away from a contract, you kind of have to be prepared to do that sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, not all the deals are worth taking.
I think it's good that he described the life cycle, so then you have continuity from beginning to winning, or whatever your deal might be.
I like that, from beginning to winning. I like that. I'm gonna steal that. So Dave, I wanted to talk to you here. So why has automation and digital transformation become such a critical issue for the food and beverage industry, especially in recent years? I'd love to know more about that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like, I think Mike started to hit on some things, even, they're talking about the buy side and infrastructure and organization's ability to kind of understand your information, get to the data, kind of know what their trends are. And I think there's a couple of ways to look at automation. There's obviously everything that you can do from a IT infrastructure perspective to basically kind of reduce your reaction time or kind of move things forward when you start to see margins erode, or you start to see labor costs go up. How are you identifying that early and then reacting quickly to that? So I think automation plays kind of a key role there. But I also think even kind of in that same labor vein, you start to see people looking at automation of how do we reduce our overall kind of people cost to deliver that same quality of service or same product to the end customer by adding in automation or adding in kind of a digital transformation lens to kind of what we do.
Any stories on that? I'm sure there's a ton out there. People are trying to use more automation in the modern space. Do you have any current stories you could share on that?
Yeah, I was thinking about a current kind of beverage customer, and I think in the beverage space, at least, where, a little bit of like bloody waters of trying to find shelf space and when our contract's going to expire and who's going to be next and how do I target. So for them, this is real recent, very specific. They were looking at kind of contract expiration and how quickly can I know that these contracts are coming and going so that I'm on top of it from a sales perspective. And you have to have good systems and automation behind the scenes to know that you're going to do that and be able to react to those and kind of get ahead of them. So that was one recent example.
No, that makes sense. I mean, obviously we live in a very digital space right now, as we are here on literally a digital call for our podcast here. So what does a strong future-ready digital strategy look like for a food company or food and beverage company today? And how does Bakertilly help build that roadmap?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, you have to have a vision of where you want to go. And we talked about some of the organizations that are potentially aging, and depending on the ownership structure, the executive team has to see that vision, and that investing in these technologies is basically table stakes. Again, kind of back to that buy side. If you don't have a solid infrastructure, you can't get to your information. You've got old systems that need to be upgraded. You're going to be in a potential problem from that. So you want to look at what's that vision as an organization. How are we going to be technically focused? We can help obviously from a strategy perspective and helping executives kind of set that vision and where they want to go. Once you start to look at that vision, then we help more in kind of the component parts of what that digital strategy would look like. So one is key infrastructure. So are you creating an infrastructure where you can swap in and out new components as they become available? A lot of organizations as of late have moved to cloud first strategies. So making sure that they're using the latest and greatest cloud technologies that are out there. So we want to make sure that people are positioned well to do that, and they have a good place there to take advantage of those technologies. A data side, which is kind of my passion area, making sure that an organization has a strong data foundation. So as they need to report out and react to events, that data is there. And then probably the other big piece from a strategy where we kind of get on a pillar is from a cyber security and risk perspective. So do you have the right controls in place to make sure that you're not vulnerable to attacks? Because as we know, those kind of threat actors are continually getting smarter, and some of the new tools are helping them get better.
The whole cat and mouse game. Yeah.
Exactly. So those are kind of the big pillars, right? Your core infrastructure around the systems you have, the data that you have, and then the cyber side of it. And those are all areas where we can help organizations kind of develop their strategy and look at their implementations.
So a quick question. This is kind of, you guys have both mentioned this once already. The transition. We have the boomers that own these companies that are off selling. Is that like a major thing that you guys are seeing in the industry now, of people just aging? Because I know you see it across the world with a lot of things. I imagine it would be in this space as well. Is that something you guys are dealing with on a regular basis?
I'd say it's a cross section, right? So you've got baby boomers, specifically in food, that have been running family or privately held businesses for quite some time, and they're looking for an exit. I also mentioned the better for you food categories. All those really started in the last 10, 15 years, and they are all built for sale, regardless of what they say. Literally, you build one of those companies, if you get really good growth, an exit is going to unlock a tremendous amount of liquidity. You also see non-core divestitures, which I didn't mention previously, but think about your big food and beverage companies that are constantly pruning kind of their portfolio of companies. So, X doesn't fit anymore because of growth or profitability, or because they're pivoting away from that category. And those divestitures are a constant flow of activity, not necessarily at the same level every year. So you see a pretty constant amount of divestitures. And then I would say you're also seeing just, a lot of venture money going into ag, food, and beverage, and the capital sourcing and the accounting and the tax and the compliance work that has to be done. Ultimately, those companies are going to get stood up. They're going to start performing well. They're either going to go public, they're going to stay private, or they're going to get acquired, or they're going to start acquiring other businesses that fit onto their chassis because of the technology that they're breaking through with regards to seed money. So we see clients across the patch, and I wouldn't say baby boomers are the force, but they're a force.
Fair enough. Yeah, curious. So Dave, another question for you. I was actually very curious about this next one here. So my experience with artificial intelligence and AI really is kind of in the ChatGPT, making Dolly images and doing more of an art direction-y type of thing.
Yep.
Marketing, shocking. But I'm curious. So obviously AI is evolving fast. So what are some practical ways that food companies are beginning to use and apply AI in their operations?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to come back to kind of where
Please.
you're talking about some of the vision pieces.
Yeah,
I think that's more the fun side, but it is the fun side, but in the traditional sense of what we would think about artificial intelligence and machine learning, that's all things like predictive, right? Predictive forecasting around what's your demand going to be, predictive what's your supply chain look like, how are you moving product product. So again, having a strong data foundation and then being able to build those machine learning models on top of it to understand demand and the movement of product. But it's kind of interesting that you mentioned the vision one, because I think everybody's now with generative AI has a much deeper, at least, exposure to AI. And vision is kind of an interesting area where 2-3 years ago, if I were to take a camera and point it at an object, it was not easy for that thing to identify what that object is.
Not at all.
And companies have had, but they've had vision AI technology for a long time to like monitor defects and do some of those pieces, but it took a lot of programming to get there. Now what's interesting is there's new startup companies coming around because the machine learning models, the generative AI models are so much better that they can do things with vision that I think is going to revolutionize an element of at least kind of the distribution side of like food and beverage. I'll go back again to kind of a beverage client where they have, obviously, they're moving beverage in and out of their distribution locations all the time. They're constantly tracking how many cases of this product did I move from here to there? Where do those cases sit? That's a human being going in, scanning barcodes and doing those. And that the barcodes are better than what it used to be, but it still takes time. With vision technology now, you could literally take cameras through a warehouse and instantly inventory everything that's there. So I think you have the traditional things that have always been there around machine learning and forecasting, predictive analytics, predictive maintenance. But I think you're going to get some really interesting use cases with vision of what's happening to my product. Where does it move?
That's interesting. I remember years ago, I read this article on AOL. This is just dating myself. There was a 56K modem involved. So I was watching back when there was nothing on the internet but the AOL welcome screen.
Yep.
And there was an article I got off of that when I was a kid, and they were talking about how like it was a programmer complaining that like they had text on a screen and he couldn't get the vision of the AI system. Well, I don't know if I'm calling it that then, to read the text. And it's like, it was complaining, it was like Times New Roman, like it was the most basic font you can do. And they changed it like 2 sizes and he couldn't read the thing.
Yeah.
And it's just like he was complaining, it's like we got to do something about this. And that feels like
well, that's even kind of backing up into some of the automation pieces that we talked about too. You know, it used to be really hard to take things like purchase orders and documents and move those through. You know, you had to create OCR models and things to do it. But with the new generative AI tools, it's super easy to take that unstructured data and make sense of it. So I think it's going to provide opportunities for efficiency of reading that information and pulling it forward. So
I think it's truly, I could talk about this stuff all day. We won't, but I think it's really an amazing subject.
I'll make one comment from an M&A perspective. You're
Please.
seeing some companies that are behind the curve with their ERPs and financial reporting systems. You're going to see them leapfrog using AI they're literally going to go, they're going to avoid all that, right? They're like, yeah, we're years behind and suddenly we're going to be at the end of the curve and on the curve. And they're not going to have to spend all the time, effort, and energy to implement those systems. The other thing is the food business in general. This is categorically not true for every single category of food and beverage. Is very thin margins as you move through the chain. AI should hypothetically improve margins at each step along the way, from the field to the shelf.
That's the hope, right? I'm hoping it doesn't turn into Skynet while we're watching. Is my only concern. You hear about the things in the news of it doing all. He's over there, hey, you know, whatever. You know, we'll see what happens.
You know, those tractors and combines that don't have any people in them. That's an interesting thing.
Yep,
it is. So many mixed feelings on that. I hope it all works out okay. But yeah. So Dave, one more for you here. So how can a business strike the right balance between innovation and risk while still adopting all these fun new digital tools and hopefully preventing Skynet from happening?
Yeah, I think the Skynet one is kind of interesting, but that's why you always say please and thank you when you interact with these models, because they're going to remember, and then you'll be on the right side of it.
There you go.
But I think as far as kind of that balance, it really gets down to one, having some intentionality around it, even going back to the strategy, right? The North Star of the strategy is having a vision that we're going to be technology forward and kind of move in that direction. So let's have some intentionality that we're moving that way. But then from a innovation side, you want to really start small. You want to prototype. You want to be ready for things to fail. If they fail quick, drop them, and then move on to the next thing. And you have to have that mindset. Sometimes that gets difficult in an IT area where you're an engineer, you like to fix problems, you like to see things through, and you have to kind of build in that muscle to be able to do experimentation quickly, see something work, and then be able to scale it up if it's actually a viable element for your business. So.
No, that makes sense. It's interesting. So we've been talking about mergers and acquisitions a little bit. If two companies had to merge, right, and they couldn't decide on what snack to choose from at their meetings, perhaps, what do you guys think would be the best, conflict resolution strategy to deal with that? Taste
Bring
test,
both.
arm
Bring
wrestling?
both snacks. Bring them all.
I say bring two snacks. Two snacks are better than one. So take some from each.
Oh, I like that. Two snacks are indeed better than one. I would agree with that.
Yep.
So cool. So just the last question we got here, guys. I would like to know the future. So, for food and beverage companies listening today, what's one piece of advice that you'd offer to help them navigate the challenges and opportunities ahead? Let's look into our crystal balls here.
Yeah, I would bundle it it's actually an overarching comment, but it's going to seem like 3 bullet points, and that's not to make it, not avoiding the question. But, companies should continue to focus on profitable growth. Profits are self-perpetuating for businesses, and most company owners should operate their companies as if they're going to own them into perpetuity. So make operating, financial, digital, and M&A decisions as if you are going to own the company forever, even if you're going to exit it a year from now, 2 years from now, or never. The next thing is management. Even though we keep talking about AI, people run businesses, not the other way around. And AI is a tool for management to get better. And our view is that if you own a business, you should constantly be looking for opportunities to grow your management team's capabilities. And that can also be augmented by outside advisors, subject matter experts like Dave, like Jeff, that can augment your team's capabilities so you stay up to market and you are one of the people that is implementing best practices. You don't want to be a follower in today's environment. You want to stay as best you can on that edge of the curve. You don't have to be on the leading edge of the curve, but you want to be a best practice sort of company. Dave, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I would just piggyback on a lot of that from a digital perspective. It is not that you have to be bleeding edge on what is happening in these technologies, but even from an executive perspective especially, you need to at least be kind of digitally fluent and know that these things are there and know that you have to move in that direction as an organization. And you have to kind of keep up with what's happening out there, because if you start to fall behind, other organizations are going to accelerate past you quickly and just tougher to catch up.
Yeah, adapt or die, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to add to that too, then just wrap it up in an overall type comment as well. And that's have your key team members, management, understand your strategy. I always like to have the conversation around current state and future state. Understand your current state. What do you want your future state to be? And how will you get there? And I'd say think big. There's a lot of great opportunities. What you heard about the technology side of things, you heard about the mergers and acquisition side of things. So there are great opportunities for your company to continue for many years to come. Again, that current state, future state conversation, understanding the strategy.
That makes sense. Like something out of Sun Tzu right there. You got to know where you're going and how you're getting there and what everybody's doing, right? So it makes a lot of sense.
Good reference.
I try. I try to read
we
it.
We have our analysts read it, so.
Yeah, Sun Tzu and the Prince are my two go-tos every couple of years.
Yeah.
Good reading. But anyway, this has been a great conversation, gentlemen. I really appreciate you all coming on the show. On the show today, we had Jeffrey Vrabel, Michael Milani, and Dave DuVarney from Bakertilly sharing their experience in everything from mergers and acquisitions to data strategy and industry growth. If you'd like to learn more about their work or explore how Bakertilly supports businesses like yours, visit bakertilly.com. Thanks so much for listening to Shelf Confidence. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, share, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, I'm John Zimmerman, and this is Shelf Confidence.